Welcome folks to the big one. This is our wrap-up video of Ethiopia, and if you've been following the channel, you know that we've got a lot to say about this country and about our time spent there. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great now that I'm out of Ethiopia, if I'm completely honest. It was a struggle, it was brutal, there were some incredible things, but for me, it really took its toll.
Yes, Ethiopia for me was nothing short of life-changing. Really opened my mind to a lot of different issues in Ethiopia and in the world in general. I have no regrets going there. In this video we're going to try and talk down the episode as concisely as we can, starting with the route to Ethiopia from Sudan. I think the overwhelming feeling for me was uncertainty, really, about how it was all going to be. Did you feel the same way on the way?
Yeah, for sure. I think as soon as we got into Ethiopia and Metema, we hadn't seen guns with civilians up until that point, and we started seeing that, people walking around with AK-47s. When we started cycling through those villages, we saw burnt out villages, and we'd heard that there'd been a lot of problems around the area, and that was really quite obvious. It looked like we'd been cycling through a war zone.
Yeah, definitely there'd been some conflict in areas that we were riding through. So I think timing wise we were quite lucky, because we avoided really all of the conflict areas. We were able to cycle the country in its entirety, which I'm so pleased about, because I know going through Africa, doing this cycling journey, there's going to be times when we're not going to be able to ride our bikes. As you know, from Egypt we had to get on a bus there. So I'm so pleased that we saw the country every inch, and for me, Ethiopia from the get-go was a big part of wanting to come to Africa. It was just this country of intrigue for me. I've long seen it as this sort of cradle of humanity type place, and I really just wanted to see it in the flesh. Yeah.
I think for me, I knew so little about Ethiopia, apart from, I guess, its reputation, especially through the 90s and noughties, as being a poverty trouble spot, there being famine, and there being a lot of aid.
Yeah.
And that's something we saw a lot of.
We saw the aid. Yeah. So let's talk about the aid. Because the aid ties in with some of the issues that we saw in the country a little bit, in that so I guess just a sort of headline, just to summarize a little bit, Ethiopia for us was challenging most of all because of the people. There are hills there, there are rough roads there, and there's some pretty extreme weather conditions there to deal with too, but primarily the challenge was with the people, and
absolutely
lots of antisocial behaviour in the form of throwing rocks at us, spitting.
Oh, we had the full works. People spitting at me. Yeah, the rocks was almost a daily occurrence. I had one guy almost throw a brick in my face.
Yeah.
But the intimidation and the threats and the provocation, it was daily, and it was really wearing. And we'd heard that from a lot of people. We know of a couple of cyclists finishing off Ethiopia as we speak, and their posts around the subject are actually quite scary.
Yeah. So with all that being said, so with the antisocial behaviour of the people there, which is primarily the young people, isn't it? It's
primarily
sort of teenagers, but there is the odd crazy.
But interestingly, for me, a lot of the behaviour of the children reflects their upbringing. It reflects the parents, it reflects the adults and the way they live their lives. On day one, when we came into Ethiopia, some kids were hassling us, and I saw an adult pick up a rock and throw it at the kids. And you just think to yourself, what kind of example are you setting? What that is, to me, throwing a rock at another, that's an inhuman thing to do.
Yeah, it really is. And so the kids are going to follow suit, and They don't know any better in most cases when they are throwing rocks at us. They don't know that you're not supposed to do that. They haven't had that basic level education, and education is a huge topic. A lot of it comes back to that, like, we grow up with just certain things you do and you don't do to other human beings, certain things you do and you don't do to stay clean, to stay relatively healthy, that they simply don't have in Ethiopia.
Just basic life stuff seems to have gone wrong somewhere.
Yes. And the kicker is that Ethiopians, and this is information that's come from an Ethiopian, they don't really understand learning. And when you think about that, it's one thing not being educated, but it's another thing not actually understanding the concept of learning. So they can't take on information, process that, and allow that to shape who they are as a human going forwards. And coming back to the aid point, one of the theories that we'd heard before going to Ethiopia is that the presence of aid, the overwhelming presence of aid there, has turned the country into a country of dependency rather than one of development. And I've got to say, as we went through the country, I saw more and more evidence of that actually being true.
I think for me, I'd sort of want to caveat, certainly from my perspective, I guess the headline there, aid being problematic for Ethiopia, is troubling for me, because I am still, even after Ethiopia, I am still a firm believer that aid is an important thing. Not only from the perspective of us in the sort of rich West having more and being able to give more and do more for them, but it's more about giving them the opportunity to be able to, give themselves a hand up. That often, with the lack of health care, the lack of education, all these things built in, create the systemic problem of not being able to get anywhere.
Yeah. And
I'm going to add another thing here, that the whole problem of an extremely young population. The average age in Ethiopia is 18. That means that half the people, and there's 100 million people in Ethiopia.
Yeah.
It's the second biggest, most populous country in Africa. And half of those, 50 million people, are kids.
I reckon we met most of them.
We met a fair portion.
Nearly carried a few on our bikes.
Yeah. But to me, the problem there is this massive undereducation, and it follows through as well. They've got massive families. In rural areas, it's typical for families to be 10, 15 strong with children.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And it's predicted that Ethiopia's population will double in the next 30 years. So by 2050, they'll have 200 million people, all struggling for education, for healthcare, for all these sort of fundamental human needs, which really at the moment are not really being provided fully.
Yeah. So the question that remains for me is the way that aid is operating in Ethiopia working better now with the Ethiopians, with the Ethiopian DNA? For me, there's still a breakdown in that relationship. Work needs to be done there somehow to actually see education happening, because I see evidence of this inability to learn. There's an ability there to imitate, but not to innovate, and not to actually be creative. And that throughout the country, really, that's what kind of wears you down, and what gets to you is the lack of a will to live in a way, like a lack of vibrancy, which was so obvious as we came across to the Kenyan end of things. We just started to see more vibrancy, more creativity, more flair in the people.
It's as simple as a bit of, a lick of paint on the houses, a bit of artistic flair and
Yeah.
like you say, vibrancy. You feel it as you're going through.
Yeah.
It's such an unusual one, the sort of lack of will to seize any of the opportunity, even the opportunity which is thrown at them by the West.
Yeah.
They refuse to take it.
Yes.
And as our friend said, our Ethiopian friend, he sort of said that any sort of success that the Ethiopians experience, other Ethiopians around them will want to chop that down rather than, edify and build up and sort of ride on the coattails of that success. They'd rather see it chopped down.
Yeah. It's like a chronic low self-esteem, isn't it?
Yes.
It's just
so frustrating.
self-destructive pattern that's there. And how far back do you go with this? Where does the rabbit hole end? One of the big questions on Ethiopia is the fact that it hasn't been colonized ever. And this is something that Ethiopia really prides itself on. They've never been officially colonized. The Italians were there for a bit. But you look at the surrounding countries and you do see the benefits of colonialism in those other countries.
Controversial point there, Greg.
Very controversial. But could Ethiopia have benefited from being colonized by the Italians or somebody else for a greater number of years? I don't know. I don't know for sure. It's definitely a big question, but I go simply based on what I see from country to country, and for sure, coming here to Kenya, you see a greater level of contentment in the people,
sure.
and the GDP here is not much higher than Ethiopia.
No, it's not. Yeah, it's an interesting one because the Ethiopians, through I guess I use the word ignorance. In not in a negative sense. They are quite literally
It's just reality.
It's reality. They are ignorant. They do not know. They're unable to know through their lack of education. But it leaves themselves very open to exploitation.
Yeah.
And one of the really interesting things I noticed cycling through Ethiopia is a large number of the regions, the people started to call us China. And also Alibaba, which was an unusual one for me, but it kind of, triggered some sort of conspiratorial thought that maybe maybe China is seeing Ethiopia as an opportunity for them, as we saw China as an opportunity for the West back in the day with cheap labor.
Yeah.
There is very much the potential there, and all the development that is happening in Ethiopia at the moment is Chinese development. It's all new Chinese roads, Chinese railways, connections to the port. We even met a Chinese guy in logistics who was basically involved in that business and building power plants. It was.
I think that's just it. China sees the opportunity and goes for it, and more credit to them here. I think here in Ethiopia, what they've done is fantastic.
Yeah,
they've built roads that go pretty much from Nairobi all the way through to Addis Ababa and further all the way up to the port in Djibouti, which sure China can capitalize on, and it's good for them because they can now trade with this area. But they've done an amazing thing in the process. There are some good roads in Ethiopia.
Yeah, great roads.
That trucks can get through now in a fraction of the time they used to. There's also a lot of bad roads as well, which we faced gravel climbing. Yeah.
But give it another year or two, and the road will be pretty much completely sealed, and that'll all be thanks to China. And already, my legs are thanking China already, let's put it that way.
Yeah, so the terrain and just Ethiopia as a country, geographically, there's something there for everybody. It is such a varied country. You've got alpine hills, you've got tropical rainforests, you've got desert in the south, the Simien Mountains, which were just stunning. And pretty cold actually up there. A vast range of temperatures, fertile land. Just an intriguing, fascinating place.
Yeah. The fact that there was hunger in Ethiopia not that long ago really blows my mind, because it is one of the most fertile places I've experienced anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
There is food everywhere.
Yeah, that was definitely a strong political background behind why all that was going on in the 90s.
Yeah, indeed. But tourism as well. Tourism is starting to blossom. There's Axum, the Ark of the Covenant's there, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
You got Gonda, which is a bit of a tourist hub, and pretty much throughout the rest of the country, as you say, there's something for everyone. So the opportunity is there.
It's ripe.
They haven't grasped it yet.
Yeah, I don't believe they have truly seen the opportunity, and we've experienced that in small ways. Like, for example, we'll be in a restaurant and it's like they just don't want to serve us. We're there with our money, willing to pay. There was even in one place where I offered US dollars because I'd run out of birr, and they didn't want to take the US dollars, which is crazy because the exchange rate that they could have gotten for that, if they'd asked around a bit, was huge, and it was in the border town as well. So, but the opportunities and just the strange behaviour, like not wanting to serve us, laughing at us, just leaving us alone for hours on end when they should have been bringing us food, or just very, very, very strange behaviour that just leaves you, if you don't really understand anything behind what's going on, kind of leaves you feeling confused. Like, is it something I said? Did we order wrong? Should we have asked in their language? It's...
Well, the thing about the language is that there were times when it was communicated in their language. We'd find people who spoke English and were very clear about what we wanted from them. They would then communicate in Amharic, and the conversation would last about 10 minutes, like no joke. And it still was not clear what was being ordered.
Just crazy little things like that really demonstrate just how grassroots and how embedded the problem is. Do you have hope for Ethiopia?
No.
Wow.
No.
Wow.
I think. Sorry, just to me, the problem of overpopulation in the next 30 years, the fact that average age is not going to increase anytime soon, and you've got a very tiny proportion of working age people supporting the vast majority who are just consuming, with giving nothing back. The kids, the older people, the people that can't work, etc., etc. That alone, add on top of that, lack of education, lack of healthcare, infrastructure problems, political problems. The list is endless. And the worst thing for me is that attitude. That attitude just, I don't think it'll change.
Yeah, it's pretty embedded. It feels very embedded in the DNA. And without some real deep behavioural changes, I'd have to agree. I don't really see, in its current state, I don't really see it capitalising on the opportunity that lies before it right now, which really is tourism. I would recommend going to Ethiopia. I would. I really would. I think people should go to Ethiopia.
It is fascinating.
And I think if you want the ultimate mental and physical test, ride a bicycle from top to bottom of Ethiopia. People people go on training camps to Mallorca and the south of France and wherever else, but Ethiopia, you'll get fit, because if you've got a 40-kilo bike on a gravel climb with some kids hanging off the back and you can't stop because you can't get traction to get going again, it's going to make you fit.
And psychologically fit as well, if it doesn't break you.
Yeah. That's as much as we have time for to talk. I mean, we could go for hours on this one. we really could. Please post your comments and questions down below. What do you think about the aid situation here? Do you have experience in Ethiopia or other African countries? If you do, we'd really love to hear from you. What do you think about that? And what do you think about the big controversial topic of colonizing Ethiopia? Did they miss a trick? Let us know.
Thanks again, guys.
Thanks for your support. Remember, World Bicycle Relief is waiting for your generous donations. Links to everything in the description box down below. We'll see you again soon.
Cheers, guys.